Greetings, class. This is part two of sorts on our analysis carried over about the Me Too movement, but we're looking at gender, power, and structural violence. And in this section, our question is, how does gender security differ from security? And let me go ahead and say that, again, what I try to do in most of these clips is give an understanding, but not to be exhaustive. Um, I'm not covering all of the issues, right? There's lots of different dynamics of gender and lots of different dynamics of security. Um, and covering them all would take a lot of time, and I think that a lot of this is kind of stuff that we're exposed to, our awareness of some of these challenges and concerns. Um, Security is the state of being free from danger or threat, right? That's our standard definition of security. Being free from danger or threat. And so one of the ways that this frequently gets talked about, right? There's viral clips that showcase this. Maybe this has happened in a class that you've been in before. Like, have a handful of whiteboard markers. I've never done this, and I wouldn't do it for a lot of different reasons. But so the person says, um, you know, women, you use this side, men, you use this side, and handful of whiteboard markers, and says, write some of the basic steps that you take in order to protect yourself from rape or sexual assault. And the women's side of the board says, carry the key for the car in between the knuckles when they walk to a parking lot, or don't walk to their car by themselves when it's dark, or avoid, different locations. Don't drink too much at a party, right? Like, just all these different steps that are taken, cognitive steps, plan making steps, from what to wear to what kind of shoes to wear, right? Because having the wrong shoes on might be the difference between being able to run away from a perpetrator. Carrying pepper spray or mace, carrying firearms, especially when I would talk to colleagues when I was in Georgia, where people were armed a lot. I haven't seen that so much in Ohio, but it's also been a pandemic. I haven't been going out as much. But it's horrible, right? It's really horrible because of what this says about a different feature of trauma in our society. But the men's side of the board would be like, don't go to jail. The place that men are worried that they might become victimized is if they go to jail. Prison rape is popularized as a punchline in jokes and a feature of threat and fear in popular cinema and stuff. And I've asked people in different contexts, and they really squirm. But why are rape jokes wrong, but it's okay to talk about people being raped in prison? Because I don't think it's funny. I've taught in prison, and that's not a protection of our constitutional rights, which outline a prohibition against torture and cruel and unusual punishment, and yet we have a society that presents being okay with it, and I think that's really wrong. But in any case, that's like the only place that the average man apparently seems like he'd have to worry about whether or not there's a threat of unwanted advances. And women are taught at a young age and go through their whole lives knowing the threat, specific targeting. So that's what we would say is a good starting place for talking about gender security, is that men and women become victims and are targeted in different ways. So if you talk about security in kind of its traditional forms, like burglary and violence and war and these categories, they may or may not, in specific locations, impact men and women the same way. I mean, we do know stuff about statistics, and we do know that there are certain types of crimes, for example, that are known as crimes of opportunity, and that perpetrators go after victims that they think they'll be more likely to get away with those crimes with. We know that not all crime functions that way, but in any case, there are threats that impact people of different demographics differently. And in particular, there's a division between men and women for a number of them. So security is the steps that a society takes or a state takes in order to maintain safety and to prevent the conditions that promote fear. And gender security is the steps taken to mitigate the sources of insecurity that come from cultural locations or religious beliefs, potentially through education, or the dominant gender within society. And we look at this locally, right? What are the things that would be different for men or women in the U.S.? But we can look at it globally, right? There are things that women have to fear in the U.S., right? As enumerated by the significant number of steps that a woman takes every week of her life in order to guard against, or to try to take extra steps to protect against the threats of sexual violence. But in other parts of the world, the insecurity is rooted even deeper, right? Places where women are not allowed to drive. What happens to a person if they don't have access, right? That increases vulnerability. That decreases opportunities for creating change. Some cultures have prohibitions against divorce or infidelity. An accusation, right? True or otherwise, could potentially cause a woman to be targeted and potentially even executed or stoned to death in some parts of the world. Genital mutilation. We don't think about male circumcision in the same way as we think of female circumcision. We don't even want to call female circumcision that. It's genital mutilation. But people will get offended if we say male genital mutilation for this religious practice. Right? So embedded in cultures, we see things that aren't even criminal that cause harm and suffering and target groups differently. We could see it play out on the athletic field, right? NBA, WNBA. One would argue that skill levels are different. One would argue that they're both as entertaining as each other. Whatever the argument one would make, there's a very clear economic difference. And there are very clear economic differences in lots of areas. Some, like I said, in basketball, the difference in biology might make a difference. In a different professional location, that might not be the case, but yet still we see a significant gender gap. Again, looking at who is dominant and who has the power positions in a society. Studies show that one of the biggest reasons in the US that men get more money than women do is that they're more likely to ask for a raise. When people have dug deeper into this to see why men are asking for raises and why women aren't, women have been punished. They are thought of differently if they ask for a raise. Even if they have the qualifications and have met the requirements for merit-based pay increases, they're not likely to get them in the same way as men do. It's a structural concern. Our structures, our society teaches, our cultures teach differences between the two. So security might cover concerns that will affect both groups. Gender security means identifying threats of violence and other fears that target some groups differently than others, right? And in this specific case, based upon gender. So, gender security means that women will have as much comfort and a feeling of being free from danger as men do. Conversely, not to make it all so one-sided, but one of the significant threat differences between men and women in the U.S. is that we have set up, according to our culture, that women would not be drafted to war, right? So one of the best arguments that has been made in recent years for trying to put an end to the draft, we're not currently engaged in the draft, but the best way to do away with it, according to some people, is to say that it's sexist to say that women can't be drafted. And so this cultural expectation of protecting women could then potentially protect men from being drafted. It's interesting how that plays out. But I don't blame people for it, right? War sucks. People get killed. They die for ideological positions that they don't support. You get lied to. We went into the Middle East because of weapons of mass destruction that never existed. And 2 decades later, we've accomplished very little, but there's been significant amounts of suffering, right? People are exposed to that. It impacts them. And gender security means that we take care of the stuff that targets individual groups within societies as well as the group as a whole. See you in the next one.